Slides there. They went from 2 minutes to 1 minute to 30 seconds, real fast. Oh, now we're at 2 minutes. Okay, all right, well, good.
This bill was a little difficult. This one, I don't know when I'll try.
Well, I appreciate your efforts.
But I really think I can do that, brother.
A lot of announcements. I'll finish early. All right. You just go right ahead. Uh-oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it was my
No,
should have
no.
gone around.
No, it was my fault for
No,
pulling it back.
It was not.
It was
I
my
should have
fault.
gone around.
It was my fault. All righty. Am I on? Yes, I am. I can tell I'm on. Attention, Bible fans. All right. About that time to get started. Steve moved the clock back, or did you move it ahead? Sunday. Steve moved the clock, so I'm never sure what time it is. You know the old thing, man with one watch knows what time it is. Man with two watches is never sure. So. Glad to have you all with us tonight. Before we get started, for those of you who have not heard, Jerry Shepard was involved in an accident. Have you got details on that? Anything? Jerry Shepard.
He's got a cracked vertebrae in two spots, and he's bleeding internally. And he's not clotting because of all the blood thinner that he's on, so they're wanting to keep him.
Yeah. Jerry had an accident. He dump truck, the brakes went bad, and he went into an area, and then he drove it out. But Dottie took him to the hospital, and he's got two places, vertebrae are broken in two places, and internal bleeding. They can't stop it because of all the heart medicine that he's on. So they're going to keep him there, obviously, and we need to remember him in our prayers. Anybody else we might need to add as we get started here? Okay. Charles, would you mind leading us in a prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we are so thankful that we're allowed to approach you through this avenue of prayer. So thankful for this life that you allow us to have, to be servants of yours and lead others to you. And Father, we have many here at the congregation that are in need of prayers and need of your strength and comfort, and pray that you will be with all of them and be with the families as well. And Father, just pray that you be with us at this hour as we come together to study your word, and that we can grow from it and be strengthened by it, and just be thankful that we have you as our Father and that we can be your children. And Father, please be with the church here in Monroe. Help us be a light in this community that it desperately needs us to be, that we can say and do all things for your glory. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And people have been asking, they've asked everybody but me about our booth. You didn't know I did Porky Pig, did you?
I can do Kermit the Frog, too.
They asked about the booth on Saturday. The booth is C33. It's on Court Street. And they put all the churches together. So it's like Church Row down there. Pardon me?
So maybe that's what the C's for.
No, it's for Court Street, actually. I think it's for Court Street. Either that or we're just down low in the alphabet. That may be what it is. But they put all of us together. Harvest Church is next to us, and the Monroe Adoption Society or something is on the other side. So we're going to be yelling an awful lot, you know. Get over the praise band next to us. But anyway, if you're going to be there Sunday or Saturday, if you're going to be there Sunday, you'll be late. If you're going to be there Saturday, it is C33. It's on Court Street. Charles and I will be setting up around 8-ish, and then I think it starts at 10 o'clock. So we appreciate everybody that's signed up for it so far, and please be praying for that effort as we attempt to reach some folks here in Walton County, in Monroe and Walton County. Okay, so as you know, we have been studying different people of the Bible. We talked about, of course, Aaron, and we talked about Rahab and Caleb, and who was the other guy? That would have been Gideon, wouldn't it? That's who we studied last week. Gideon. This week I wanted to talk about two more people in the Old Testament. We got a little bit more to go in the Old Testament. Two more people in the Old Testament, and they're sisters. And the reason you have to talk about them is you can't mention one without mentioning the other. It's sort of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Hamlet. You can't mention one without the other. It's sort of like Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street, or maybe Burns and Allen. Those of you who don't know who Burns and Allen is, we'll tell you later on. But anyway, you have to mention them together, and that's Leah and Rachel. Of course, we all know the story very well, but I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this and talk about Rachel and Leah and some of the things in the story, and just keep find out a little bit more about this and talk a little bit more about it. So let's set it up with the backstory. Of course, we all know the backstory. Jacob is sent by Rebekah to her brother Laban to find a wife. Of course, we know that's only a secondary reason. The main reason that he went there is to save his life, because he had stolen the birthright from Esau, or deceitfully stolen the birthright from Esau. If you will, you want to turn to Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 through 3 is where we will start this evening. Genesis 29, verses 1 through 3. So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field. And behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. So he has gone to Padam Aram, which, as you can see is up on the left-hand side there. So it's a lot farther up than I originally thought it was, but it's a long way up there. And he had gone there to get away from the wrath of Esau, as you will. As he's there, as you discover as you keep going in these verses, he meets a young lady named Rachel. And it's love at first sight. I love the way that the verse states it. He kissed her, and he nearly cried. He wept out loud because he kissed her. That's kind of a syrupy thing, isn't it, when you think about that? But he was in love of Rachel. He went back home with her to her home, and he met her father, Laban, who was, of course, his kinsman. And he started working for Laban, and he worked for him for about a month or so, and that's when Laban decided, maybe it's time I start paying you. And more than just room and board, more than just food, I would like to go ahead and start paying you. So what would you like for me to pay you? And what did he want in return for work? Pardon? Rachel, your daughter Rachel. I'll work 7 years for your daughter Rachel. How many of you have got daughters? I've got some daughters, How would you like it if a guy came around and said, I'll work 7 years for you, for your daughter's hand in marriage?
I'd say bring it.
But that's how much he was enamored of Rachel. 7 years for that. So in Genesis 29 and verse 20, it says, Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Again, syrupy. Man, this guy was in love. He was really in love. Well, the 7 years are up, and Jacob demands his payment. So Laban says, okay, I will pay you. I will give this woman in marriage, and a marriage feast is held. But Laban substitutes his oldest daughter, Leah, for Rachel. Now, this is a question that's always bothered me, and I looked up a little bit and I got some ideas on it. But have you ever thought about that? How did Jacob not know that this was Leah? How did he not know that this was Leah? Go ahead. A veil. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Anything else? Charles, you're doing this. Yeah, go ahead.
When you consider how Jacob had been living, I think he did.
Say that again.
When you consider how Jacob had been living, and he was pretty much a con artist, I think maybe he did know.
Okay.
That's just my opinion, though.
Okay. That's a fair something. Anybody else? Yeah, and I always thought about that. I looked it up and I found some, and one of them was that she was wearing a veil. This one I thought was rather weak. It said in verse 23, it was evening, so he may not have been able to see her. Well, okay. Here's another one I thought was pretty good. Jacob may have had too much to drink. Now that's plausible when you think about it. Or it may be that Laban may not have told either Leah or Rachel about his arrangement, and Leah may have been fooled as well. By the way, we don't know. This is all conjecture. So I thought it was an interesting thing to wonder how in the world he could have not known that this was Leah that he was having. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in my country, to give the younger before the firstborn. That's Genesis 29, 25 through 26. Jacob, of course, is understandably upset at the turn of events. He was going to get Rachel, and he ends up with Leah. So he went to Laban to get those answers. And I wonder if Jacob understood the irony in the situation. Here was a man who 7 years earlier had deceived his own father and had stolen the birthright from his brother. And now here's Laban saying, well, we can't give the younger before the older. It's kind of interesting that that's the way it worked out. Sometimes those things happen in the scriptures when you start thinking about it. And it was kind of interesting that that happened the way it did. And I don't know if he did understand the irony or not, but I'm sure it must have crossed his mind. And as Charles is mentioning, you know, he's a deceitful person himself earlier. So maybe he knew it all along. So what Laban did was he told Jacob, okay, you can have Rachel, but I want you to wait a week, probably for all the wedding guests to go away so they wouldn't give the gifts back. So he waited that week, and then he waited the week, and he said, he said, you can work 7 more years in exchange for Rachel's hand. And Jacob agreed to this. Then in the 30th verse it says that Jacob also went in to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. And that to me is probably the saddest part of the whole thing. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. So, by the way, he worked 7 years for Rachel, and then he agreed to work 7 more for him. How much in love can you be? I mean, that's pretty steep right there. So let's look at the sisters a little bit, and we'll talk about them a little bit as we go along. In the 17th verse of Genesis 29, it says this, Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Today, that's the way we would say, she's got a nice personality. When you think about it, that's about right. Now, depending on your translation, it may say that Leah's eyes were weak, they were tender, they were soft, or as it says here, delicate. That's a New King James Version. There's been a lot of debate on exactly what that meant. Were they tender doe eyes, is what someone said, or were they weary eyes? And I thought this was rather interesting. I found this. Now, understand that this is not Bible. This is a tradition that somebody did. There's a commentary by a gentleman named Rashi, who was an 11th century French rabbi, who cites a rabbinic interpretation of how Leah's eyes became weak. Leah was destined to marry Jacob's older twin brother Esau. In the rabbinic mind, the two brothers are polar opposites, Jacob being a God-fearing scholar and Esau being a hunter who also indulges in murder, idolatry, and adultery. But people were saying Laban has 2 daughters and his sister Rebekah has 2 sons. The older daughter, Leah, will marry the older son, Esau, and the younger daughter, Rachel, will marry the younger son, Jacob. Years ago, when I went to Moreland Avenue, there was a family, the Glissons, and then there was my family, and they had a daughter, a son, and a daughter, and my parents had a son, a daughter, and a son. And everybody thought, oh yeah, the 3 of them are all going to get together. That never happened. So, but that's what they're talking about here, you know. You got 2 here, you got 2 here, they're going to get together. Hearing this, Leah spent most of her time weeping and praying to God to change her destined mate. Thus the Torah describes her eyes as soft from weeping. God hearkens to Leah's tears and prayers and allows her to marry Jacob even before Rachel does. Now, of course, that's just a story and it's just tradition. And as Charles pointed out, it goes against what the story actually happened. The way the story actually happened is that Jacob was not the most, what's the word I'm looking for? He wasn't the nicest man. Let's just put it that way. He was willing to work 7 years, but he was also willing to steal his brother's birthright. What we do know is that the name Leah is a Hebrew word, as you might imagine. And by the way, it's pronounced La'ah, according to what I looked up. But I'm not going to pronounce it that way because I always remember it as Leah. It means to be weary, to be impatient, to be grieved, to be offended. And if you think about Leah, all of those things fit her. She was named that before this ever happened. Apparently, Rachel was much prettier than Leah was, which may account for the attraction from Jacob. And also, he saw her first, so we don't know what would have happened if he saw Leah first. Going back to the wedding night, if Laban had not told either of them about the arrangement, Leah would have accepted this marriage a lot more easily. She would have just agreed to it. Okay, I'll go into him because this must be the way it is. She was the oldest, and she was supposed to marry first, so it would make perfect sense for her to do that. She would have been surprised the next morning and grieved the next morning with Jacob's reaction. Ladies, imagine how you'd feel if your husband woke up and said, "Whoa, what are you doing here?" It would not be a great way for you to wake up that morning. And, you know, when you think about Leah, sometimes you have to think about Bible characters in human terms, because they do have feelings. They did have feelings back then, and, you know, you have to think about how they might have reacted in these situations. But let's consider that the sisters may have known about the arrangement. Imagine how Leah would have felt watching Jacob work 7 years, knowing that Rachel was going to get him, knowing that Rachel, her younger sister, was going to marry the first good-looking guy that came along. And at the end of those 7 years, there was still no one for her. Then when Laban filled her in on the scheme, what might have been her thinking at that point? When he finds out it's me, he's going to love me. When he finds out it's me, he'll love me. That'll be the way it goes. Either way, you can imagine how Rachel must have felt when she found out it should have been her. This is Rachel finding out, wait a minute, I was supposed to be there, not Leah. Imagine that. At the end of the marriage scheme, we read this: Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. Rachel received an unexpected gift. She received a husband that she didn't think she was going to get. Not just that, this was a husband who loved her. And obviously, over the 7 years, something must have gone back and forth between, you know, he would have paid more attention to her than he would have to Leah. Any number of things that at least would have given her some hint. Surely this was the beginning of a long and fruitful marriage, right? Wrong. It was not the beginning of a fruitful marriage. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. That's Genesis 29 and 31. Now the Hebrew word that's used for unloved here is saneh, and it means exactly what you think it means. It means to be hated. It is the same word that was used to describe the relationship between Joseph and his brothers. They hated him. So the question I want to ask is, do you think, now, you know, again, these are conjecture type questions, do you think that Jacob actually hated Leah? That much hate?
No. No.
No?
He gave her 10 sons.
Gave her, okay, all right, good point.
Well, the jealousy between the two sisters had to be pretty high.
Yeah, it could have been pretty high between the two of them. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Anybody else?
Probably hated the situation.
Don't get ahead of me. I keep telling people not to get ahead of me.
About how Leah was unloved.
Mm-hmm.
And did he hate her?
Yep.
I don't think he hated her. I think he hated the situation he was in.
And that's a point that I've got later on here. Yeah, you're absolutely, I believe you're absolutely right.
Another point you were going to make later on.
It's okay because I open myself up to that, you know, because I ask a question, you answer the question, and, you know, if you answer what I'm going to say,
Show your signs.
I can't say it later on. Now, the interesting thing is that when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. And right here, I'm not convinced that Leah was hated for herself. I think it was an outgrowth of the hatred that Jacob found for the situation he was in. But again, think about this. Jacob finds this situation, and he's got to think about things that he had done in his life. He's got to think about all those things that he had done back at home. Boy, what would my mom say about all this? Well, what would Dad say about it? What would Esau say about all this? He would say, yeah, you got what was coming to you, didn't you? So he had to think about those things. I don't really think that he hated her as much as he hated the situation. And I've used this example before. When I was a kid, we talked about, a couple of us here talked about this. When I was a kid, my dad bought a Chevrolet Biscayne. And it was a pretty car. It was white, you know, and had 4 doors. And we loved it when he brought it home. And it was great because we could all sit in there. We had one of those air conditioners where you put ice in it and then, you know, blows the air over the ice. It didn't work, but, you know, at least we had one. But that car was a lemon. I mean, it just gave him nothing but trouble. So my dad never bought another Chevrolet in his life. I didn't buy a Chevrolet until about 6 or 8 years ago because the memory of that Biscayne kept coming back to me. It kept coming back to me. And, you know, I just hated Chevrolets for that reason and that reason alone. So the question I have here is, you ever had a quarrel or a problem with a friend which ended up affecting the relationship of your children with their children? Things cascade sometimes, don't they? And that's what happened in this situation, is that Jacob, you know what? Jacob was probably mad at himself too for all the things that he'd done, and that just kind of cascaded into it. It is a common human problem, but it's one that we can overcome. And I think for Leah, it was overcome in time, because here's what happened next. This is 29:32 through 35. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Jacob probably said, "Whew, I don't know." Despite the fact that Leah was hated, and you put that in quotation marks, Jacob still fulfilled his husbandly duties, didn't he? Now all you women are out there saying, "Yeah, that's a guy for you." But she bore him sons. She went along with it. She did everything. And they were the first patriarchs of the tribe of Israel. Don't underestimate Leah. When you look at those 4 verses, you're going to see that she was stronger than you might imagine, and probably stronger than even she could have imagined. With each successive son, as each one came along, she still hoped to gain and earn the love of Jacob. She never gave up. She never got discouraged. She knew that even if Jacob didn't hear her, God heard her. And she hoped that Jacob would change his heart. That's Leah. That's a pretty strong woman when you stop and think about it for a moment. You know, she's just not one of these women that just rolls over and all. She's a strong woman. And she's trying to love this man and trying to get this man to love her. But most importantly, she's a strong woman of faith, because she hopes in God. She trusts in God. She follows God. Now, imagine Rachel's side of the whole situation. She's barren, and she's watching her sister have all these kids. And I'm sure what's going through her mind is, what have I done to deserve this? When you think about it for just a second, you know, people used to talk about in the scriptures and all that somebody was barren because they had done something in their past. Now, you know, this situation kind of goes along with that, except it wasn't Rachel's fault. It was the man's fault. Oh, you ladies say amen. It was the man's fault. It was Jacob's fault. It was Jacob's fault that Rachel was barren, because he didn't love her as he should have loved her, because he didn't care for her the way he should have, because of his attitude. She was barren, and maybe she thought God was punishing her. What's going on here? Later in the narrative, in desperation, Rachel nags her husband and finally gives her her handmaid. And Jacob has 2 sons by that handmaid. Now, this is interesting because, again, we go back in time and we look at the story of Sarah and Hagar. And Sarah said, "I can't have this son. I'm too old to have this son. I'm going to give you my handmaid, and she's my substitute. She's, what do they call it now? The surrogate. She's my surrogate. And so she said, here you go. Does this compare at all with that? In any way at all? Why or why not? I don't really think it does, because in that particular case, Sarah showed her lack of trust and confidence in God by giving Hagar to him. In this particular case, she gave her handmaid to her out of desperation. Just out of desperation. Well, if I can't have the baby, maybe she can have the baby. By the way, there was no promise made that she would have that. There was no promise that this would be whomever. Recorded. Yes, you're absolutely right. Recorded. Thank you very much. If I'm going to make up stories, you can say that too, right? No, you're absolutely right, and I apologize for not saying that, because it's true. We don't know what went on that isn't recorded. So we're not absolutely sure that there was no promise recorded. But it doesn't seem that there may have been. But nonetheless, she gives her handmaid, and there are 2 sons born. At this point, Leah re-enters the sweepstakes. She gives her handmaid to Jacob, and there are 2 more sons born. Not long after this, Leah's firstborn, Reuben, is out in the field, and he finds some mandrakes. And he brings them home to his mother. Now, the Hebrew for mandrakes is loosely translated as the love apple. It was considered to be, shall we say, just a sort of an aphrodisiac, if you will. It was considered to be something that would increase fertility. They were thought to be able to increase fertility. Pardon me? I'm sorry. Magical powers. There you go. Yes. She traded some cows, of her cow for them. No, they were thought to, magical powers. I like that. Oh, really? Yeah, that goes along. One time when I was teaching at Conyers one time, I was teaching the first graders, and I had to explain to them the story of David and Bathsheba. That was not easy, I got to tell you right now. Not for first graders. But anyway, Rachel at this point is grasping for straws. She says, I'll do anything. So you've got these mandrakes here? Boy, I want these mandrakes. When Rachel sees these, she says, you got these mandrakes? I'd like to have these mandrakes. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a deal with you. I'll let you have Jacob for a night if you'll give me those mandrakes. They'll make me more fertile. And so she does. Instead of the plan working for Rachel, Leah has 2 more sons. Now, understand what that entails. More than one night, right? More than one night. They had to have at least 2 nights together. So there you go. There is an interesting dichotomy that goes on in this series of events. Here is Rachel, who is loved so much by Jacob, she is desperately trying to give her husband a son. She is desperately trying to do that. And here was Leah, who was desperately trying to get Jacob to love her, to just love her, by giving him a son, and another son, and another son, and another son, and another son, and on and on. But you know what? This is a lesson that we can take away from this. Neither Rachel nor Leah could earn his love. They could not earn his love. He could only give it to them. They could not force Jacob to care more. And it's just like God. We can't earn God's love. God already loves us. He already loves us more than we can ever imagine. There is absolutely zero that we can do to make God love us more than He already loves us. And here they were trying to earn this love. So there's a little lesson that we can take away from that. So let's see, I had a question here. I just answered my own question, so I guess I'll just skip right over that one. One of the points that I have drawn out of this lesson with Leah is the fact that she was faithful. She was faithful. She considered that God would bless her with these sons, and that in doing this, it might be able to help her with her relationship with Jacob. But there are also two very interesting things that I thought I would pull out of this lesson as well. First of all, when Rachel finally did have a son, who was her son? Joseph. Jacob, as would be expected, loved him more, didn't he? He loved him a whole lot more than those other sons did. As a matter of fact, he loved him so much that he made the other sons jealous. And it led to a plot to kill the dreamer. But who saved him? It was Leah's firstborn son, Reuben, who stopped the plot and actually tried to get Joseph out of the clutches of those other brothers. Now again, this is not recorded, so I'm going with this. But you know, one of the things that mothers did back then was the kids sat at their feet and they told them things. You know, they weren't commanded at this time. Later on, they were commanded to tell the stories. But I can imagine that his mom told him the stories about what had happened in their lives and how much God had blessed her and how much God meant to her and how much she loved God for giving him her these blessings. And as he listened to her tell about this, he could see how much she depended on God and how much she loved God. And it may have softened his heart enough to the point where when Joseph was threatened this way, instead of wanting him to die, as the other brothers did, he would have said, no, I'm going to just put him away. Put him in this pit here. And then later on, I'm going to come and I'm going to grab him and take him away and save him from whatever happened. But God, of course, in his providence, had him sold off as a slave, and then we'll go on with that. The second one is that it was from the tribe of her fourthborn, Leah's fourthborn, Judah, that Jesus came. Jesus did not come from the tribe of Joseph. He did not come from the tribe of Benjamin. He came from Judah, the son of Leah, who was unloved. But one of the elders said to me, do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and loose its 7 seals. That's Revelation. When Rachel died in childbirth, she was buried basically right there on the side of the road. Now, understand that that's the way it was done. Remember the story, this is one of my favorite lines in a Bible story, is when Lazarus died, 4 days later, said, roll the stone away. And what was it that Martha said? Lord, by now he stinketh, Well, if they'd have left Rachel out like that and carried her wherever they needed to go, 4 days later, she'd have stunk pretty hard too. So they had to bury her right then and there. That's what they did back then. So she was buried right there. But when Leah died, she was buried in the tomb with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah, and in the tomb where Jacob would later on be buried himself. Whether he planned it this way or not, maybe it was God's providence. Leah had earned a special place by Jacob's side. So when you look at the story of Leah and Rachel, you can come away thinking it was a pitiful story if you want to. Think about this. Unrequited love. Have you ever loved somebody who didn't love you back? Yeah, everybody's doing this, That happens, Those things happen. But in this case, she was tied to him. Unrequited love. Second place in someone's heart. A woman begging for the affection of a man. Almost literally begging for this man's affection. But there's a lot more there. J.M. Barrie, who wrote the story Peter Pan, said this, let no one who loves be called altogether unhappy. Even love unreturned has its rainbow. The lesson that we can learn from Rachel is to be patient and to be content with what you have. Her son came in God's own time, didn't he? Just let him come when he comes. Be patient. The lesson from Leah is to never give up and to trust in God. Even if it's against the odds, trust in God and do not give up. It's interesting to note that Leah was in second place in Jacob's heart. Second place. First place was Rachel. Absolutely, no doubt about it. Second place was Leah. She wasn't his first choice, And, you know, it's interesting when you read the story. When he went back to Esau, he sent the handmaids first, and then he sent Leah and her children. Then he sent Rachel and her children. Then he came across. So if he gets this person, if he gets this group, you know, at least we're here in the back. And it was Leah who went before Rachel. Rachel's firstborn, Joseph, as we see in the dreams that he had, was destined to have the other brothers bow down to him. But what happened to him? Well, Leah was in second place in Rachel's heart, or in Jacob's heart, right? Joseph ended up in second place in Potiphar's house. Joseph ended up in second place in the command of the prison. And he ended up in second place in command of all of Egypt. Second place. In Ruth 4:11, when the people are celebrating the coming marriage of Ruth and Boaz, this is what they have to say. Of all the people who were at the gate, and all the people who were at the gate, and the elders said, "We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to you, to your house, like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem." Do y'all remember the Avis Rent-A-Car? Remember Avis Rent-A-Car? Remember their commercials? What were their commercials? Yeah, well, I was in advertising, so I remember.
They're number 2 and they try harder.
We're number 2. We try harder. Sometimes you just have to do that if you're number 2. Leah may not have been as loved as much as Rachel was, but her love for her husband cannot be underestimated, and her love for her sons cannot be underestimated, and most importantly, her love for God cannot be underestimated, and it cannot be doubted. She tried hard all the time. She never gave up, and she trusted in God. It's a great story. Leah and Rachel is just a fantastic story. And when you think about all the moving parts that went along here, I didn't even get into I should have written these down, but, I didn't even get into the names and what they mean and all that. But Leah named them these names in particular because it meant something. It meant something with her relationship with God and with Jacob. So anybody have any questions, any comments, or any thoughts?
Yes.
Joe?
Just as a matter of conversation, was Rachel patient and content? Was she patient and content? Would she have given her handmaid to Jacob?
Well, I didn't say she was. I said the lessons we should learn from her are to be patient and content.
Well, that's what I said, a matter of conversation.
Yeah, no. It got to the point where she was desperate, and you're absolutely right. She lost her patience there when that happened. And that's something that we need to think about. Sometimes we become desperate. Have anybody here except me ever become desperate in a situation? You just think, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. I've told this story before. I haven't told it here in 30 years, 25 years. But years ago, we used to live in a mobile home in Conyers, and we got to the point, I was working really good and I was making a lot of money, and got to the point where we could move, we could get a house if we wanted to. So we started looking at houses and stuff, but it found out that I needed to sell the mobile home before I could move to a house. It's just I had to get it off my credit. You know how that goes. Some of you are laughing now, you know what I mean. But I kept thinking, how am I going to sell this mobile home? Who wants to buy a mobile home, So I did everything I could think of. I put notices everywhere, put stuff in the paper. Nobody ever came by. I had for sale signs, all of this stuff, on and on and on. I even got to the point where I thought, okay, I'll do one of those things where you have people pay $25 or $100 or whatever for a ticket, and then you draw one name and that person wins, and you've got enough money to pay off the mobile home. I even thought about those things. And then one day, we had about 5 people in this 14 by 70 mobile home, and 2 of them were babies. So it was 6 people. But anyway, so I kept thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Desperation. And finally one day it dawned on me, this is silly. And I sat down and I prayed. I said, Lord, if you want us to live in a 14 by 70 mobile home, we'll figure out a way to finish this out. And I just let it go. 2 weeks later, somebody came by and bought that mobile home. Again, they may have come by if I hadn't done that. I don't know, but I think that sometimes the Lord just says, watch this. And He may have worked in your life. He may have worked in your life and you didn't even think about it that way. I don't know. But it's interesting when those things happen. Anybody else? Anybody else have a comment, question, thought? Yes, here.
I think that would be called providential care.
Yes, it would, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. If you've lived in a 14 by 70 mobile home, you know what I mean. That's providential care. It was a nice house. I shouldn't say that. But not for 6 people. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, well, I actually finished with the lesson, and I taught everything that I wanted to teach tonight. So that's really good. Next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about what I call supporting cast. I know 2 of the people that I know for sure are going to be in this is Ed wanted me to teach. He better be here next week because he told me he wanted me to teach on Uzzah. So he'll be one of the ones I'm talking about. And I'm also going to be talking about this Shunammite woman. And if I have a little bit more time, I want to talk about Gehazi. So that'll be the last of the Old Testament, and we'll move on to the New Testament from there. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions and your attention. I appreciate it.
I knew I wrote that down. Oh. Well, good evening, folks. I think all the classes are out and coming in. We'll get the Thomasons in. Good to see everyone this evening. I see some folks bundled up. A little cool. Been a beautiful day. And I know our young folks had good lessons tonight. And again, we appreciate Scott's lesson. Very good. Thank you, Scott, so much. I want to mention this couple of things. Barbara Tittle would like to meet with the ladies after services tonight, just a short meeting. So all the ladies, after we finish up, if you just come down front here, and Barbara wants to meet with you. Let me remind you again, always, I don't see them now, but please pick up a bulletin to keep up with the information. And again, we're looking forward to the Fall Fest. Appreciate Scott's work on that and those that have signed up for it. Again, he reminded that C33 on Court Street, and that's from 10 to 4, and please remember your assignments there, and ask Scott if there's any way that you can be of help to him there. Again, we just with mixed emotions always as we talk about we've mentioned some within our church family that we want to continue to keep in our prayers. Obviously, we want to continue to remember Pat Gibson, recovering from surgery, and thanks for doing much better from that. It's good to hear that Almeda Cooper is going home tomorrow. So it's good that Almeda is going home. We're just so sorry to hear about Jerry Shepherd. You know, Jerry's been having difficulties, but he won't quit work, and so he was at work today and backed up, had a truck accident, and cracked some vertebrae, and having other difficulties. So let's please keep Jerry in our prayers, and Dottie and Chrissy and the family for Jerry, and just hope for a quick recovery for him. Good to see Sharon as she continues to recover. I just ask prayers for Susan's mother. You know, she fell and had to cancel her surgery, and still haven't heard yet, have you, Susan, for a reschedule on her mother's surgery. So let's please keep them. Brother Ed, as you can see, is not with us this evening. He is under the weather, so let's keep Ed in the family. Jeff Vines is having back problems, so let's please remember Jeff and with it. And I heard today that my sister fell. She's been keeping us up to date with pictures on a new great niece that we have, and then I don't know what she was doing when she fell and broke a leg. I haven't talked to her yet. So my sister broken a leg. Let's remember that. But again, as I said, let's remember Barbara Tittle has asked the ladies to come down front here. And again, we have a number of things. Our ladies' class is back. We'll meet next Tuesday, October the 11th. Youth Devo, let's keep that in mind. Terry Jenkins is hosting that on October the 16th. And the Secret Sister drawing coming up. So let's please remember that. I know there's other things. There are probably some other people that we might have mentioned, but let's please keep all in prayers and to reach out. As always, we take opportunities that, and again, as I always say, the invitation is always open. But we do take this opportunity on Wednesday evening to offer the invitation, and the song number is there for that. I liked the devotion, Charles, and again, appreciate Amy sending these out, daily devotion. And one of the things that he was talking about was greeting. And, you know, this church family I'm so happy about is a good family that reaches out and that they do greet. And it's so important there for that. And some of the things that he mentioned in this, and as we think about this invitation, that we all want to be good greeters. If we're not good greeters, we need to do something about that. The word greet is used by way of instruction for brethren towards the rest of the brethren. Greet the brethren, tells us in Colossians 4:15. Greet every saint in Philippians 4:21. Greet all the saints in Hebrews 13:24. Greet those who love us in faith, Titus 3:15. And I think that's a great thing that we do, is we love those in faith. So we greet one another with a holy kiss in Romans 16:16. And, you know, we always have some question about that. We got a brother, there's a brother at Dalton, he would greet you with a holy kiss. And, but it's a scriptural thing there. But we greet friends by name And I think it's so good as we learn names of people to be able to reach out and be that. But I mentioned those things that may not be the best thing for an invitation, but it's one that ought to move us and tell us the kind of people that we do need to be. Any way we can help you, if you need to be baptized, and I'm looking around, I'm not sure if we have any of that, but if any way that we can help, or if you have any problems, please let us know as we offer this invitation.
Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for you and for me. Though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home.
Will you bow with me, please? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for the opportunity we had to gather here tonight as brothers and sisters in Christ to worship you. Thank you, Father, for your everlasting love that you have for us and for the whole world. And because of that love, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to lay down his life for the sins of the world. That through obedience to the gospel, we can have forgiveness of our sins. Thank you for the church here in Monroe. Ask you be with each and every one of the elders and bless them and keep them in good health. Be with all the deacons that serve. Be with all the teachers that stand before the classes and teach. And thank you for each and every member who is involved in all kind of different ways to help spread your gospel to the world. Help us to be the kind of influence that we need to be, that the world can see Christ in our lives and that they can glorify you. Be with those who were mentioned tonight for medical reasons. Ask you be with Jerry Shepherd and his medical problems, and be with the doctors that treat him, that they'll be able to help him, that he can be restored to his health. Be with all those others. Be with them. Be with the doctors that treat them. Be with us. Bring us back at the next appointed hour on the first day of the week. In Christ's name, amen.